Now, you can't move in Edinburgh this week for stand-up comedians. It's the last week of the Fringe Festival and the city will host dozens of gigs and comedy routines of varying quality. It's a reminder that to be a stand-up comedian is now a genuine career choice. Stand-up has been booming for years. I'll be talking to our own in-house stand-up comic and free speech campaigner Andrew Doyle in just a second. But I'm afraid the story we're going to be discussing is not remotely funny. It's appalling and moving and sad and terrible. It's the story of Nazar Mohammed, a comedian who mocked and ridiculed the Taliban. And the Taliban, like all humorless totalitarian regimes, do not like to be mocked. They are in the business of being deadly serious. So they executed Nazar Mohammed, who also went by the name Kashazwan on TikTok, where he had many followers within and without Afghanistan. This is a recording of Kashazwan after his capture by the Taliban. He's the man in the middle with the lugubrious face, I think it's probably fair to say. The key point here, he is still telling jokes, still trying to make his captors and the regime they serve feel ridiculous. Because of Ofcom rules and because it's not yet 9 o'clock with the watershed, we can't show you what's particularly emotive, I think, which is that how he gets slapped around and just carries on ridiculing those people who would later, well, if not them, then others, would be taking his life. According to Human Rights Watch, the comic was executed in Kandahar. Shortly after those pictures were taken, his throat was cut, his body was riddled with bullets, and it was dumped then for his daughters to collect. Such is life in Afghanistan. Well, it's a dangerous game, mocking Islamists, which is why, though many British comics like to talk about how they fearlessly skewer those who deserve to be mocked, they tend not to have a crack at hardline religious fanatics. It's easier to take a pop at Boris Johnson or Prince Andrew than it is to satirise Salafists who force a teacher into hiding in Batley. Let's get the thoughts then of Andrew Doyle, who is here with me now. Andrew, thought about this poor comedian first.
Well, it's utterly tragic, and like you say, there's something very poignant about the video, and the fact that he persists in mocking his captors it's so brave. And it's, I mean, some people would look at it and say, well, that's foolhardy, but it's not. I mean, it's so powerful what you can do with human. That's why they killed him. You know, I mean, this is the point throughout history.
Just before you come on to history, do you recognise that compulsion in the face of punishment even to keep cracking gags? It reminded me a little bit almost of, you know, we're both English literature graduates.
Yes.
You know, the fool in King Lear.
Right.
Who's forever treading this fine line between holding up to ridicule the monarch and getting killed for going too far.
Yes, I mean, Lear is a good example because, of course, the fool gets away with it. Well, it doesn't work out well for him in the end, but he isn't killed by the king, is he? So the point is that the fool has always historically been able to you know, mock those in power, to speak truth to power and to keep his head.
And some of those people in power liked it, that's the point.
Yeah,
King Lear had a fool to keep his feet on the ground. The Taliban don't want that.
But tyrants don't want that. This is the thing, and this is the key distinction. And I do recognise this in comedians, is that if you know, even on a sort of level of the UK circuit, you know, if you're told you're not meant to joke about something, then your instinct is to do so. You know, and that's what I recognise in that. It's obviously a very different situation. But there is something about vocational comics. I'm not talking about the kind of comics who just want to be TV presenters or something. I'm talking about actual comics who have an instinct for it, is that they want to rail against what they perceive as being power.
And yet, what they rail against, or at least as I hear it on the radio, TV, seems quite narrow.
Right.
So a lot of, I mean, you know, you see more of it than I do, you hear more of it than I do, and maybe you see a much broader range of targets.
Yeah.
But it doesn't feel like the targets I talked about in my introduction there, for instance, having a pop at some of the crowd stroke mob who gathered outside a school in Batley in West Yorkshire because a teacher had showed a...
Well, you know, because we have seen what happens to people who mock those kinds of targets.
And did comics acknowledge that? Do they say, look, I'm not going to take a pop at Salafists because I'm worried I'm going to get my head chopped?
Most comedians that I speak to about this issue say that they don't mock it because they don't know enough about it, because they're not raised in that background.
No, I don't mean that, Andrew. I mean, do they acknowledge publicly that the reason they're not getting in to that territory is because they may face serious reprisals?
No. Generally not. I mean, if you think about when Spitting Image withdrew their Jesus figure, I'm going back like 20 years here, but they had a puppet of Jesus. They had complaints from Christians and they didn't do anything about it. When they had complaints from Muslims, they did. Now, they didn't say why. And obviously,
we know why, don't we?
We do know why, and it's obviously not to smear Muslims at all as being, you know, that's not what we're saying here. There is a very
objective fact.
There is a very extremist minority of Islamists who do go out of their way to commit violence against those who mock them. And it only needs to be a minority, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at Charlie Hebdo, the French satirical magazine, 12 people massacred by just a couple of, you know, psychopaths. who have this extreme religious ideology. And that's why that kind of thing does send a message, because it only takes a couple of people to commit that kind of atrocity, and comedians around the world will suddenly self-censor, and that does happen more and more. So those kind of targets people don't go for that for simple reason of self-preservation. But of course, you know, when it comes to the tyrannical, when it comes to despots, we need those voices that are going to point at them and laugh. We need the ones who can mock. But of course, again, we've constantly had this where you know, Erdogan in Turkey, President Erdogan.
Yeah, take it away from the Islamists, because I mean, as you say, there's it can be totalitarian regimes of different stamps, can't it? It could be Joseph Stalin.
Stalin's a good example. I mean, Stalin. There was a poet called Osip Mandelstam who wrote a poem about Stalin where he mocked his cockroach whiskers and fat fingers like worms. That's what he said.
You know what? He's for the Gulag, isn't he?
Well, at first he was exiled. Kept trying to redeem himself in Stalin's eyes, didn't work, ended up in a corrective labour camp and died of malnutrition in the first year there. So that's a good example of that. Erdogan, though, I mentioned because he's a present-day leader of Turkey. He's introduced some obsolete law which will give him the right to punish anyone who insults him. There was actually Miss Turkey, the beauty queen who won Miss Turkey, was sentenced in a court for a satirical poem she wrote about Erdogan.
The pictures of Miss Turkey.
Because I've just thought of it now.
Okay.
In fact, Erdogan's another good example because Jan Böhmermann, the German satirist, made a music video mocking Erdogan.
It
was massive because Erdogan then suddenly said to Angela Merkel, "I'd like this person prosecuted." She actually entertained it for a while. Luckily, she backed down when she was criticised. But that's the point: is that when you have a tyrannical leader, this is what they will do. And there are so many countries throughout the world still that have lèse majesté laws where you cannot mock the king. Countries like Saudi Arabia, Thailand, Cambodia, Morocco, all these countries where, you know, it's still a very real thing. Now, we think historically, and we think, well, you know, the monarch who cuts the head off of the person who offends, it's actually still going on. And I think when you see something like Charlie Hebdo, you realise that actually it is still very much present. And it's something that, you know, thank God for the comics who are particularly subversive.
Well, I agree. I mean, and it's worth saying. I mean, it is possibly really conflicted on this. You know, I am a God-bothering Muslim Catholic, and you know, I don't enjoy my religious faith being held up for derision, but I accept it's a price you pay for living in a free country. Not everybody does accept that. Just a final point on Nazar Mohammed, and I don't know if we can show the video again. The video that doesn't show him being slapped, but does show him cracking gags even as he's being driven to his death.
Yeah.
How do we celebrate? How do we remember somebody like that? He's, you know, in the West, he'd been arguably held up for awards and all the rest of it, but not there.
It's very unfortunate, isn't it, that these are the images that people are seeing and they're not seeing his work. And of course, it's difficult for us because his work will be in his own language. It won't be. We won't be.
We don't know how funny he is.
We don't. Well, there's that. But you know, how do we celebrate? Well, we talk about him and we deride and continue to deride his captors and his killers, and that's what we do. And I think one of the most powerful things that we can do is to mock tyrants such as the Taliban. But wherever we see tyranny, I think of what Hannah Arendt said, which is the greatest enemy of authority is contempt, and the surest way to undermine it is laughter. And I think we should always remember that.
Andrew Doyle, thanks very much.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.